Today, we're going to deconstruct a really fascinating group of diseases called vasculitis. This is a situation where the body's own defense system gets confused and starts attacking its own blood vessels. I mean, just think about that for a second. What if your immune system, your own personal bodyguard, couldn't tell friend from foe anymore? Well, that's exactly the problem at the heart of vasculitis. It's this out-of-control inflammation happening in the very pipelines that deliver life to your entire body. So at its core, vasculitis is simply inflammation of the blood vessels. But it's this friendly fire that's the real issue. This attack can make the vessels get thick, weak, or scarred up, and that chokes off blood flow. And since blood vessels are everywhere, literally any organ can get caught in the crossfire. Your skin, your kidneys, your lungs, you name it. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the two main ways this whole attack goes down. Then we'll look at the diseases that go after the small vessels, then the medium ones. And finally, we'll pull it all together and talk about the clinical clues that should make you think, hey, maybe this is vasculitis.
So how does this all even start? Well, to really get a handle on vasculitis, you have to understand the how. The attacks, especially on the small vessels, are basically split into two different pathways. And trust me, if you get these two, everything else will make so much more sense.
Okay, check this out. This slide really breaks down the two different strategies the immune system uses. On one side, you've got ANCA-associated vasculitis. Here, your body makes these rogue antibodies that target proteins inside your own immune cells. Now, on the other side, you have immune complex vasculitis. This is more like collateral damage. Clumps of antibodies and antigens get physically stuck in the vessel walls and cause a big inflammatory mess. A biopsy really tells the story. With immune complex disease, you literally see these clumps clogging up the vessel wall. But with ANCA, it's sneakier. They call it posse-immune, which is just a fancy way of saying there are very few immune deposits to see, because the real culprits, the ANCA antibodies, have already done their damage and kind of fled the scene, leaving destruction behind without leaving many fingerprints.
And this shows you exactly how that sneaky ANCA pathway works. It's a chain reaction. First, an immune cell called a neutrophil gets primed or switched on. This makes proteins that are usually hidden deep inside move to the outside of the cell. Then, the ANCA antibodies, which shouldn't even be there, latch onto those proteins. And that's the trigger. The neutrophil basically self-destructs in a process called netosis. It literally explodes, throwing out this destructive, sticky net that just tears up the blood vessel wall.
So, now that we've got the two main battle plans, the ANCA sneak attack and the immune complex siege, let's see how they actually play out in real diseases. We're going to start right on the front lines with the conditions that target the body's tiniest, most delicate vessels.
So let's jump right into that first ANCA pathway with the classic example, a disease called granulomatosis with polyangiitis, or GPA for short. Now, GPA, and you might know it by its older name, Wegener's, is famous for this clinical triad. It hits three main areas: the upper respiratory tract, causing things like nasty sinus infections, or even a saddle nose deformity, where the bridge of the nose collapses. It hits the lower respiratory tract, so patients might be coughing up blood. And it hits the kidneys, causing a really aggressive and rapid type of kidney failure. So the key takeaway is, when you see this pattern, your brain should scream GPA, and you immediately check for its signature antibody, c-ANCA. Right on the heels of GPA is a similar condition called microscopic polyangiitis, or MPA. And it can look a whole lot like GPA, especially with the lung and kidney problems. But there is one crucial difference that sets them apart.
And here's that difference, laid out side by side. The biggest clue is what you see under the microscope. GPA forms these things called granulomas. They're like organized little balls of inflammation. MPA doesn't have those. And while both can hit the kidneys pretty hard, with MPA, it's almost a guarantee. Nearly 100% of patients have renal involvement, and it's often the main problem. And you can see they also tend to have different types of ANCA, which is another huge clue for diagnosis.
Okay, time to switch gears. Let's move over to that second mechanism we talked about, the damage from those sticky immune complexes. And the classic example here is IgA vasculitis. You might have heard of it as Henoch-Schönlein purpura, or HSP. And you see this one most often in kids.
The presentation is just classic. Picture a young kid who develops this very specific rash. It's called palpable purpura. They're these raised reddish-purple spots that don't go away when you press on them, and they're usually all over their legs. They might also get some arthritis that seems to jump from one joint to another. But here's the really crucial point: the kidneys. In kids, the kidney damage is usually mild. But if an adult gets this disease, it can be way more serious, sometimes even leading to kidney failure.
All right, next up is a really wild one. Cryoglobulinic vasculitis. The name pretty much tells you what's going on. Cryo means cold, and globulin is a type of protein. So these are literally antibodies in your blood that clump together and turn into solids when the temperature drops.
Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting. Look at this chart. Type I is often linked to blood cancers, but check out types 2 and 3. About 90% of those cases are linked to hepatitis C. I mean, that connection is so incredibly strong that finding this type of vasculitis is often how an underlying hep C infection gets discovered in the first place. And that is a total game changer, because it means the treatment isn't just about suppressing the immune system, it's about curing the virus that's causing the whole mess to begin with.
Okay, so we've been hanging out in the world of tiny capillaries and small vessels. But vasculitis can also go after the bigger guys, the medium-sized arteries. So let's take a look at what happens when these larger pipelines are the target.
A major player here is polyarteritis nodosa, or PAN. And just like we saw that really tight link between cryo and hep C, PAN has a strong association with hepatitis B. Clinically, you'll often see patients with these stubborn skin ulcers that just refuse to heal, along with feeling generally unwell, fevers, weight loss, that kind of thing. Now for another really important medium vessel vasculitis, Kawasaki disease. This is a disease you see in young kids, and honestly, it can be a diagnostic nightmare because the symptoms look like so many other common childhood illnesses. But there is one symptom that is the ultimate red flag. 5. That's the number. A fever that lasts more than 5 days. This is the absolute non-negotiable stop what you're doing sign. Any young child with a prolonged fever that you can't explain, you have to consider Kawasaki disease. Because if you miss it, the consequences can be serious, like damage to the arteries of the heart.
And to remember the other signs, there's this fantastic mnemonic, crash and burn. The burn, of course, is that fever lasting more than 5 days. And crash stands for conjunctivitis or red eyes, a rash, adenopathy, which means swollen lymph nodes, a bright red strawberry tongue, and changes in the hands and feet, like swelling or peeling skin. You see crash and burn together, and Kawasaki should be at the very top of your list.
Okay, so we've looked at the mechanisms, we've gone through some of the specific diseases. Now let's zoom out and put it all together. How do we take all these patterns and actually use them to suspect and diagnose vasculitis in the real world?
The most important thing is knowing when this should even be on your radar. So here are the big red flags. That palpable purpura rash we talked about. Kidney function that suddenly tanks for no obvious reason. Coughing up blood, skin ulcers that won't go away, or widespread nerve damage. When you see these kinds of things, especially if the person also feels sick with fevers and weight loss, you have to be thinking about vasculitis. I think this quote just nails it. Vasculitis can look like total chaos because it can hit any part of the body. But the key, the absolute key, is pattern recognition. Seeing the GPA triad, recognizing the 5-day fever of Kawasaki, spotting the purpura of IgA vasculitis. The battlefield is always the blood vessels, but the strategies of attack, the patterns, are what give the diseases away.
Learning to see these patterns is what transforms a confusing mess of symptoms into a clear diagnosis and, most importantly, a plan for treatment. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other medical mysteries are out there just waiting for us to finally decode their patterns?